You're about to watch the second part of the two-part discussion on the sustainability of farming biodynamically. The first part dealt with the theory and the principles of biodynamics. And in this part, I have a conversation with Rosa Kruger, a vineyard manager from South Africa, and Johan Reyneke, who has farmed biodynamically for the past 15 years and organically for the past 20 years. We talk about issues. How did we get to this point that we are currently finding ourselves in the COVID-19 situation? We talk about the sustainability of farming biodynamically. We talk about climate change, and we talk about what can we do in our small little environment to contribute and think about the world as a different place. Enjoy.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining this discussion. I think at this time it is a very important discussion that we're going to have. Before we ask Johan Reyneke, the expert on biodynamic farming in South Africa, to discuss biodynamic farming in detail, I would like to put this way of farming into perspective, fit it into the bigger picture. Where does this fit into the whole puzzle? I will not easily speak about a subject in which I'm not an expert, but all of us have been touched deeply by the COVID-19 virus. Numerous infectious diseases have their origins in the close contact between humans and wild animals. This seems also to be the case for COVID-19. Scientists tentatively concluded that this virus originated in bats. This is not the first virus of its kind. The SARS virus transferred from bats to humans already in 2002 and 2003. Where did this start? It looks like it started somewhere in the wet markets in China. Well, there are actually many kinds of wet markets across the world. Wet markets where anything from lizards, porcupines, baby lion cubs, scorpions, monkeys, rare birds, wolf pups, literally 100 different kinds of wild and rare animals and birds are slaughtered and sold under the most horrific conditions. For what? To what end? For medicinal purposes, which has never been proven, as an aphrodisiac, which has never been proven to my knowledge, or as ornaments. It's for human pleasure and human indulgence. These animals are often poached in the cruelest of ways, leaving tracks of blood and destruction behind them. We've all seen the pictures of rhinos being slaughtered, of elephants defaced to get 2 tusks from them. This, combined with climate change, forms the backdrop in which I want to discuss biodynamic and organic farming. I think at this stage in our development, nature is saying that it's enough. There's enough abuse and enough exploitation. Our oceans, our wildlife, our forests, our planet are all under threat of human exploitation. During the last month, since half the population of the world is housebound, many cases have been reported where wildlife is returning. It's beautiful to see it. The world is not only for the strong and the clever and the best. Survival of the fittest. There should be a place for all living beings. There should be a place for the weakest together with the strongest. Biodynamic and organic farming demonstrate a basic, strong respect for nature. We walk alongside nature rather than to dominate or ignore it. We are only one member of a team on this earth. We are not the team. And with this,
Johan, people often say that biodynamics is not a science. What is your opinion about that?
Lorraine, I think it's important that we first say something about how science works. This is rich coming from a person who's not a trained scientist. But I'm of the opinion that science is true, but not necessarily absolute. And why I say so is if you take something like light, for example, if you try and explain how the transfer of light works, essentially starts with an assumption. So some clever scientist somewhere in the world makes an assumption that light consists of particles that move through space. And what they then do is they can build an experiment where they can prove to kids in classrooms all over the world that light consists of particles. But then you get a different scientist who makes a different assumption. They assume that light moves in waves. And then you can build another experiment and you can prove to kids all over the world that light moves in waves. And then the understanding eventually comes that it's particles moving in waves. But the point I'm trying to make is that both of those scientists were true, but neither were absolute. So where science is an incredibly effective tool, the most effective one that we currently have, I think there's a lot which is still has to be explained. So the danger of sort of following this train of thought that I'm expressing now is, if you say, yeah, well, it could be this and it could be that, and science hasn't really explained it yet, but I think it's true, you sort of go down this rabbit hole of nihilism and relativism. And one of my favorite philosophers is a guy called Nietzsche. And in his book, Beyond the Good and Evil, he wrote about relativism and nihilism. And he said that if you take something like relativism to its logical extreme, it becomes a self-refuting argument. Because if all things are relative, so is the position of relativism. What we sit with is quite a difficult life to live. On the one hand, science works, but we must be aware of its limitations. And on the other hand, we can't put the same amount of faith in Father Christmas and the Easter Bunny as we do in other, validated scientific truths. So all things aren't relative. So if you look at biodynamics from that point of view, I'm trying to almost, instead of trading off science versus biodynamics, how does one scientifically prove the various biodynamic preparations? One of the approaches that we took on our farm that I actually thought was less contentious and actually quite enlightening was to involve science and use it in its strongest sense, which was its ability to measure. So what we did is we had over the last decade or two, we've had numerous PhD and master students from amongst them University of Stellenbosch. And they have looked at insect life, like entomologists. They've looked at the plants that come up here. They've taken soil samples. They've looked at microbial activity. They've looked at fungal activity. They looked at the grapes, on the grapes, in the grapes, the must in the cellar. And they've done incredible work on that. And if you look at their scientific results, you can see there's a phenomenal improvement on the farm over the last 20 years. I would say, to me, the biggest bonus was an increase in diversity. The second important thing is that there seems to be not just an increase in diversity of the farm, but a much better balance between the different diverse parts. So if you look at microbes, for example, they're finding, when they did the studies, they compared our farm to some surrounding conventional vineyards and also biological vineyards, which use chemicals and make compost and everything else. And I mean, if you want to find out more about these tests, they're available from the University of Stellenbosch. I can put people in touch with the people who did the studies. But it was fascinating to see how the microbes, for example, grew in number significantly, how much more diverse the microbial species in our soil became. And most importantly, I understand, is the balance within that diversity, because in nature, the more diverse an ecosystem, the more stable it becomes. So I think there's definitely biodynamics and science do not need to be mutually exclusive. And I'm not saying one must accept everything that biodynamics does. And if you read Rudolf Steiner, he doesn't advocate that either. He says, he's giving certain guidelines and he wants people to work with them. And if they come but you know, they mustn't be following his methodology dogmatically. But on the other hand, I've also had people with a very limited understanding of biodynamics say, well, you know, yeah, I don't want to use preparation 501 in South Africa because we have enough sunlight as it is. And fact of the matter is, you know, 501 does more than just bring you more light. We don't always understand the extent to what the preps work. So what we've chosen to do is we've chosen to do all the biodynamic preparations, use them, use the field sprays, the compost preps, and then measure the outcome scientifically. And also keep an open mind that, like science is true and not absolute, I think one could say, you know, a lot of the biodynamic insights could also be true, but not necessarily absolute. There's always room for improvement, room for debate. Yeah, one should question these things, think about them, but not become paralyzed by this, okay, well, if I don't know everything, then I know nothing sort of nihilistic mindset that can also slip in.
While we're on this topic, can I quickly interrupt you and talk about soil health? Because that is one of the key aspects of biodynamics, where Rudolf Steiner was a great advocate for improving the soil health. What are you doing as a biodynamic farm to improve your soil health? And Rosa, you work with a lot of vineyards. You're welcome to add if you would like.
So, to me, I think the most important part was to realize that I'm actually farming with two things. In the short term, and this is really important, I'm farming with grapes and I make wine. So I really have to look after that well. Because if I don't look after that well, then I won't be able to, you know, follow the long-term dream of building my soil. And like Rosa said earlier, I learned that lesson the hard way. Initially, like a few years ago, I was just, you know, everyone said if you look after your soil, it's easy to farm organically. And there is an element of truth in that, but it also oversimplifies the process a lot. So if you Google how to build microbial activity in your soil, or soil health, or humus levels, there's two things that stand out. The one is if you can increase the humus levels in your soil, it becomes a lot easier to farm organically. And there was a Dr. Uwe Hoffmann that used to work at Geisenheim University around about the year 2000. And he told me that if I could increase the humus levels of my soil to 5%, it would increase the vitality or more the robustness of the plants that grew there with as much as 300%. So in other words, make it a lot easier to farm organically if you have high humus soils than if you have low humus soils. And this was a particularly unique challenge for us, because if you go to a conventional vineyard in Europe, if you go to Germany or if you go to France or somewhere, and you put a spade in the soil, you're going to find humus levels of maybe 2, if you're lucky, maybe 3%, but probably not. But if you come here where we live and we farm in the Western Cape, you're going to be lucky if you find humus levels of 0.7 to 0.9%. So our soils are much older, they've been extensively weathered, and the biodynamics that we apply here and the organics that we apply here needs to be sensitive to that fact. And we can't follow exactly the same methodology that they would use in Europe, for example. We really have to extra attention to build up our soils so that it becomes easier to farm organically. So what I did is I thought, well, that's going to be easy, because if you want to build soil humus, you only need two things. You need a lot of organic matter and you need microbial activity. So what I did is I looked at which plants gave the most organic matter, and those would be the grasses. So we sowed things like oats, rye, and triticale, and we obviously didn't spray them with Roundup, because if you do that, then they all just return to dust again. But we used a tractor tire that I dragged behind the tractor to flatten them, almost like pulling a blanket over the soil. And then I did experiments. I inoculated with microbes that I got from a Dutch multinational company. I did a few rows where I used EM, which is effective microbes from Japan. And then I also did a few rows where I used the Biodynamic Preparation 500. And when I looked at the cost and the outcome, that was the deciding factor and why we went the biodynamic routes going forward. And it was it worked. I mean, the earthworms came back, the soil became soft, it became a dark, rich color. It improved tremendously in its texture and its structure. And I thought it was wonderful for a period of about 3 years. And then overnight, my yields plummeted and they went down to about, let's say, 3 tons per hectare. If you have yields of 3 tons per hectare in viticulture in Stellenbosch, that's the end of the road for you. So I got a big fright. And a lady who really helped me there was, not sure she was a prof or a Dr. Barbara van Wegma, who was a microbiologist in Cape Town, but she lived here in Stellenbosch. And she walked the farm with me and she said to me, you know, if you build good compost, your ratio of nitrogen to carbon is 1:30. So you'll use 1 spade of cow manure and 30 spades of grapes, pips, and stems and skins. And then you mix them and you water them and you build your perfect compost heap. But with all this organic matter in your vineyards, your carbon levels have been skewed now. They're not 1:30, but they're 1:500. So in its invertible itself, your soil is sucking all the available nitrogen. And as a consequence, there's not enough for your vines, and that's why your yields have dropped. So what we then did is we then had to very quickly change the plants that we sowed and move away from the grasses and the grain species and focus exclusively on legumes. And I also had to introduce a herd of 53, 56 now in Nguni that also graze in the vineyards and bring them manure and help to offset that. So yeah, like most things, you know, it's like layers of an onion, and you can keep on peeling off layers and getting to better and deeper insights. But that would be to me the one of soil health for us. But like I said, right when I started, one must realize that you're farming with 2 things. In the long term, you want to build your farm soil. You want to invest there for future generations. And it's also known as regenerative agriculture. You don't mine the place like a mine where you just take what you can. But on the other hand, you must keep an eye on the grapes, because if you're not financially sustainable, none of this is going to happen.
Based on what you've just said, we've had quite a few questions about how does biodynamics differ, according to your opinion, in the southern and the northern hemisphere? Are there any differences?
I think so, definitely. When I started off, there wasn't a lot of biodynamic help in South Africa. It was before I met Jean Malherbe. And even after I met her, she'd never been farming with grapes or had a knowledge of viticulture as such. So I did a lot of work with Dr. Uwe Hofman, but also with Georg Meissner. And they both were based at the time at Geisenheim University. And as I mentioned to you, there was, you know, it became apparent that we had to really look at our building our humus levels, and key to that would be preparation 500, for example. So I used probably double, triple the amounts of preparation 500 that they recommended for farmers to use in Europe at the time, because I really wanted to build up my soil health. And then there were other things, in terms like weed management, for example. They had this idea that they would grow a sort of a winter cover crop, and then they would work it into the soil in springtime, and then sow into that a second cover crop for summer, but which would not grow as aggressively, much smaller plants. The ideal was really just to sort of keep the soil covered, keep it alive. And that obviously didn't work for me at all, because our summers were simply too hot and too dry. So when I in all of that winter cover crop, I ended up almost destroying my soil, because my soils lay open and bare for the full extent of that summer, and the sun baked on it, which wasn't ideal. So what we do today is, it boils down to balance. We use plants to fix nitrogen and to sort of help the vines to grow a bit. But we also use them to, you know, cover our soils. And what I say to people is, if you farm with vegetables or flowers at home, you'll immediately, you know that you have to remove all the weeds, otherwise you're not going to have a nice vegetable crop. But when you go in wilderness or in mountain, you don't see any bare soil. So for soil to live, it needs to be covered by plants. So as a farmer, you have to find a balance between these two ideals. On the one hand, you have to keep your soil covered for the sake of the soil. And on the other hand, sometimes you do remove the plants that grow there for the sake of the vines. And there's no silver bullet here. And that's, I think, where the difference between knowledge and understanding comes in. That's why people like Rosa are so absolutely crucial, because they can walk into a vineyard and intuitively know to what extent that vineyard is suffering, whether it's suffering too much or just the right amount or too little. And depending on the age of the vines, depending on the fertility of the soil, depending on the climatic conditions of that season, how much it's rained, what the previous year's yield was, and then, like I said, just the state of that vineyard at that moment, you can then decide to sort of farm a bit more with the vineyards this year or farm a bit more for the soil this year. But at the end of the day, it's about maintaining that balance.
That is a word that seems to crop up quite often when we talk about the concept of biodynamics, and that's balance. Yeah. We have to also talk about the economical scale of things. Johan, do you mind just talking us through the certification, the accreditation of farming biodynamically? And can you explain this to us in terms of the farm, the winery, and then exports?
So essentially, South Africa doesn't have any organic or biodynamic standards which are enforceable, which is quite shocking, really. It means anybody can probably go and put any product on the market and sell it as organic, and there's no legal recourse to stop them from doing so. But as a wine farmer, we export probably 70% of our product on an annual basis, and we export to the European Union, and we also sell wine in America and Canada. So there are no universal standards in the world. You have the EU standards for Europe, and then you have NOP for America and Canada. And if you look at those, there are certification bodies. So if you go to Germany, there would be Ceres, for example. If you go to France, EcoCert. I think the Netherlands is SGS. England would be the BCS, British Soil Association, BSC, or BSA, whatever. But what you would do is you then have to, as a South African, use your weak currency to fly these people in to come and do an audit for you for those countries. What makes it even more tricky is there are trade agreements between between Europe and America. So if you are certified to EU standards and you're a European organic farmer, America accepts that, and then you can sell your product as organic in America as well. But because South Africa doesn't have that agreement, we have to actually be certified twice. So the person will come over, and then they will certify you to EU standards, and then thereafter they have to go through the same process again, a similar one, and then certify you for NOP standards. On top of that, I just wanted one thing. There is movement to make it a bit more affordable for South Africans to certify. And I know that, I think it's I don't know if it's called EcoCert or a Frisco, but there is a movement to get local inspectors so that you pay rands and not euros, but it's still pretty expensive exercise to go through. Keep on exploring them, they're dynamic, they're changing all the time, but that needs to be done. Then once you've got your organic certification, you need to then biodynamically certified. Now, the dominant body to do that would be Demeter, but there's also another option, which is BioVin, based in France. And again, we're not just talking paying for certification here, but there's additional costs. You have to pay a percentage, just under 2% on your actual turnover, not on profit, but on the turnover of your product. So, you know, I don't think any of these things were born out of malice. When I spoke to the guys at Demeter or Demeter, they said, well, you know, why we do this so that small guys pay less and big guys pay more, because big guys have more wine and small guys have less wine. But for the South African organic or biodynamic farmer, this is a lot of certifications to pay for. We have a weak currency. We don't have the same trade agreements. We got zero government support. In Europe, they get tax rebates. They get incentives to farm this way. None of that whatsoever forthcoming for us. Then it's, you know, we make wine. So you can't just do the vineyard. You now have to certify the winery as well. And then that wine must go to some or other third party using a distribution channel. And they also have to be a part of the certification process, just to make sure that it's all for the benefit of the consumer at the end of the day, that they know if they buy a wine that's certified organic or certified biodynamic, that there's been a very, very rigorous process of control to do that. And when I say rigorous, I mean it. These guys, you know, they look at everything. They look at, they do unannounced visits. They take leaf samples. They send them to laboratories in Germany to look for chemical contamination. They'll draw wine samples. They'll test that. They have access to your invoicing system. They'll come and have a look at the shed. They'll speak to the workers. You know, where do you guys keep this and that product, or what do you spray? So they approach it from multiple levels, all for the sake of the consumer and to give it a good credibility. And if I add up the rands and cents value of all of this, you know, for not a very big business, I mean, I would say we're kind of small to medium at this stage. It's almost 100,000 rands a year that we have to fork out for this system of credibility. Now, I live in a country where 30 to 40% of people are unemployed. There's probably 2 or 3 months of the year where I actually have enough cash just to pay all my bills. Every other month, I have to think, geez, how are we going to do this? How can we make ends meet? You know, so as a farmer, it's not like there's a lot of extra cash around. I look at many, many, many poor people. I would much rather take that $100,000 and give it to our staff, for example. You know, give them a proper increase in their salary. I feel, you know, from a personal point of view, that would be a much better thing to do than to just give it to some multinational company and that money goes overseas. The problem is that, you know, from the years 2000 to 2006, we were not certified for the reasons that I've just mentioned. I think in Scandinavia, it sort of started with the Systembolaget and the vin monopoly. The government has a say, and they started putting certain barriers to entry, like corporate social responsibility or organic or fair trade or whatever. And these increased every year. So less and less and less of the wine that they bought were just the old school conventional farm like you want, treat your workers how you want, which is a good thing. So it kind of forced us a bit, but with that came a broader global consumer change. And as the consumers started changing their behavior, a lot of greenwashing followed. So overnight, guys were referring to themselves as being organic or being biodynamic. And, you know, I'll be honest, in some instances, I was absolutely shocked because I know these people. And there may be a lot of things, but one of the things they definitely are not are organic and biodynamic. And they're not bad people. But, you know, there's a lot of marketing also in our industry, and people like to sort of embroider their efforts, and I'm probably guilty of doing the same, so I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. But I think there is a necessity or room for third-party endorsement these days, because it's just too easy for people to, you know, say stuff which are not necessarily the truth. It can be a bit of a white lie, stretch of the truth, or whatever you want to call it. So for me, this is probably one of the most difficult things. If you know, my dream is that our brand would be strong enough that people all over the world would look at it and say, ah, I know these guys, you know, they're organic, they're biodynamic, they treat their workers well. But until such time, this is the route we have to go. And I just feel, like I said, it would be lacquer if I could, you know, put that money to better use, give it to people who really could, you know, the extra plate of food on the dinner table in the evening, that type of thing.
And this is a question that Rosa actually asked you when we had our discussion. She asked, but Johan, are people willing to pay more for biodynamic wine?
So I recall Rosa and I disagreed on this. And she's probably right, because she usually is. What I said, if I recall correctly, is I think people must pay for quality. And I think quality must always trump, that's such a bad word these days. I must find a substitute for it. Quality must always be more important than I don't know, ideology, for example. But yes, it is true, especially in the conversion period. I remember Jonathan Stein also asked something about the costs of going this route. And it is true that you do have a dip in yield initially in the first couple of years. And it is true that you spend a lot more. You can imagine, if you want to clean a vineyard that's full of kweek by hand with forks, as opposed to just quickly spraying it with whatever herbicide. So there are increased risks, there are increased costs in the short term, and that is also makes it very difficult for farmers to do that, in addition to the certification costs that we've just spoken about. But you know, the other side of the coin is that, especially if you farm biodynamically, you move from a sustainable system to a more self-sufficient one. So the example that I used during our chat was that, you know, post-harvest, the conventional farmer has a sort of a chemical understanding of what needs to be done. So they will calculate and say, you know, to produce X tons, we need Y kilograms of nitrogen just to keep the system going. And then they'll go and buy the cheapest form of nitrogen that they can just to keep the system going. The organic farmer doesn't necessarily want to do that, because if they do that, it's not always sustainable. A lot of the cheaper ways to put nitrogen back in your vineyards very easily leach out of the soil, contaminate the rivers and the waterways. They lead to acidification of your soil, they kill off the microbes and the beneficial fungi and that type of thing. So the organic farmer will go and, you know, buy a certified organic fertilizer, and that would typically not be a chemical-based product. It will be animal manure, and they will compost this and pelletize it, and then you buy that and apply this in your vineyards. The biodynamic farmer, he or she probably would go out and buy a cow, and then they would bring a cow to the vineyard. And you know, a lot of people laugh and say, oh, no, I'm farming with grapes, why do I want to buy a cow? But it boils down to a better understanding of waste. And I say that, you know, if you look at everything outside, what you can see in the air, what you see around you, if you dig a hole in the soil, there's life everywhere, but nothing wastes anything except for one animal, and that's us. So, I mean, I'm fortunate enough to eat 3 meals a day, and every single time I eat or drink, I contribute to waste. There's always packaging involved, stuff like that people throw away, and we obviously try and recycle as much as you can, but we're a very wasteful species on this planet. And what biodynamics does is it stops that, or it gives a way out. And to me, that's probably the most beautiful thing of biodynamics. And I think there's a lot of emphasis on the planting calendar and the biodynamic preparations. And I mean, they're wonderful and they are controversial, and that's probably why they get so much attention. But to me, the best thing about biodynamics is this idea of self-sufficiency. So if I farm with grapes and I farm organically, I still have waste. I make wine and then I have all the grapes and pips and stems and skins. And if I farm with cows and I farm organically, I have an incredible buildup of manure and high nitrogen levels in that area. But the moment I start farming with both, the problem sort of goes away, because I take the waste from the winery and I feed that to the cows. I take the waste from the cows and I feed that back into the vineyards.
Yeah.
The easiest way to understand biodynamics is to see it's as a farm with multiple organic systems that sort of feed off each other in a synergistic fashion.
You've once before explained that to me like the spokes of a bicycle wheel, where all of that feeds back to the center. Can you just explain that in another sentence?
So that was actually, it's an old permaculture concept. So what they said is the farmer must, if you visualize a bicycle wheel, if the axle of the wheel is where the farm house is and where most of the energy is spent. So that would be like your chicken coop, for example. You know, you can't just leave your chickens over weekends and Christmas and New Year and not bother about them. You have to look and make sure they have food and fresh water every day. But there are other things that you can relax a bit on a weekend, and that would be a vineyard, for example. Maybe not throughout the year, but through a large part of the year, you can work there Monday to Friday and take a break from the vines, on the weekend. And the same would be for wheat fields, things like that, or orchards. Yeah. And then if you had forestry on your farm, you would probably visit that even less. So now, like concentric rings, or you put a pebble in the pond, the less you need to be there, the further away from the homestead you establish those practices. But what I've really appreciated was that they insisted that right on the perimeter of your farm, you left a space for wilderness. And planning was that no matter how good an organic or a biodynamic or whatever kind of farmer you are, it's still invasive. It's still a form of aggression. It's not as aggressive as conventional agriculture, but you're still, interfering with nature to a certain degree. And if you have a barrier of wilderness around your farm, you get that ultimate balance that you get in a wilderness environment. And then, like spokes of the wheel, what they wanted to do, almost like the British used to have the hedgerows before they started pulling them out and putting wire fences around their plots, you would then bring like spokes of the wheel, pocket or strips of wilderness all the way to the center of the circle. You could bring that balance into your farm, and you could also reduce, if you had an outbreak of something in one area, it would have to go through a buffer zone before it could get to a next one. But it also would allow wildlife like a mouse or whatever, the ability to run across the farm, around the farm, wherever, without actually being endangered by doing so.
One aspect that, Rosa and Johan, that we haven't even spoken about is just by having a herd of 15 goonies on your land and looking at them in the afternoon when you go for a walk with your dog and your family. I mean, to witness that and to know that these animals that you greatly care for actually plays a significant role in the long-term sustainability of your farm. That must be incredible. You never know that kind of exposure. Perhaps one of your children, becomes in their profession, forms something because of that exposure. Yeah.
Lorraine, it's such an important thing to say, and we didn't mention it when we did the talk last week or earlier this week. I always say another very important principle of biodynamics, and this is something that John taught me and that I didn't read or hear or whatever, is the difference between commercial and inherent value of things. So she said that when you talk to somebody about the value of something, everybody thinks about money. What's the value of something? You would think, how much does it cost?
Yeah.
But what John said to me is, if you have a room full of people, you don't go around and ask them how wealthy they are before you respect them. And you don't show more respect, or you shouldn't, to a rich person than to a poor person. you must respect their humanity, the fact that they're alive, the fact that they're fellow human beings. And if you look at a biodynamic company, you know, if you look at the workers there, they get paid. They work, let's say, from 8 to 5 every day, and they get paid for that work. But the fact is that they actually contribute a lot more than just the work that they've done. They almost have a bigger family. They can share a joke, they can give consolation, you can brainstorm with them.
Yeah.
They really go through hard times, carry you, and they never paid for that. And one must at least be aware of that and show some respect for that. And then if you take it to the animal kingdom, it's the same. So, you know, a lot of the problems, I mean, we started with this horrible wet market picture. And how that happens is that there's a disconnect between people and those animals. They see those animals purely as objects. So if you look at, for example, you spoke about the cows. So if you look at how people farm with cows, it's crazy in my opinion. They cut their horns off, they put numbers in their ears, and they put them in little pens, and then they give them growth hormones and antibiotics, and it's just about money. It's like how much meat, how much weight can they gain, how much money can I make off them as quickly as possible. They're completely just objects that you number so you can keep record of them. Now, that is definitely not allowed on a biodynamic farm. On a biodynamic farm, you never cut the horns off a cow. You don't put numbers in their ears. You give them names. They are subjects. They have personalities. What they bring to the farm is so much more. Yes, we do drink their milk. Yes, we do eat their meat. But if you really think about it, you know, the fertility they bring to the farm throughout the course of their lives, just the experience, the quality of life of being, like you said, around a herd of animals, these type of things. So that is very heavily emphasized in biodynamics. And then it also goes down to the plant kingdom. So if you look at weeds, for example, I remember that one of the first things that Jean Malherbe said to me is, I stood there with that vineyard full of weeds, and I said, what must I do? I used to spray them, must I mow them, or must I plow them up? And she said to me, your farm is a book. These weeds are letters in this book, and you have to learn to read again. Some of them are good. You know, this thing that you've been spraying all year long is called, you know, medics or veg. And it's actually wonderful because it fixes nitrogen and it put it back in your soil. And that other thing there is really problematic. It's called quick and it's allelopathic. And yes, you have to remove that. But the idea is that you kind of try and understand why they are there. You know, nature sent them because it doesn't, for the soil to live, it needs to be covered. And those are pioneer plants that get there. So it's kind of, yeah, I don't know, I'm getting a bit carried away here, but you get my drift. That, but then you have to balance it out with, you know, you have to live, you have to make a buck, the farm has to be profitable, and you can't just let the vineyards be overrun with weeds and stuff, because I was there as well, and trust me, that it's also not fun, and it doesn't work, and you're going to lose your farm very quickly. It's just that whole thing of balance and understanding and respect, really, that's important.
So what you're actually saying is that people who often judge us and say, yeah, you farm organic or biodynamically, it means that you sit back and you just see how it all happens. It doesn't actually work like that. It's a careful design of your farm.
You know,
yeah.
I think Rosa can confirm, or I won't put her on the spot, but trust me, it's not easy. We brainstorm a lot. Like every second week, we sit with a room full of, I won't call it problems, but I'll call it challenges. And you have to really up your game if you want to farm in this way. It's definitely not sitting back. And you can, and I did that, but what happens is that nature just takes over your farm again. Your farm goes back to wilderness. So it's kind of, you have the one hunter-gatherer extreme, and then you have this modern agribusiness, industrialized agricultural extreme, and in the middle is the art of farming, agriculture, as opposed to agribusiness. And I think that's what we signed up for.
Rosa, I see you very
Lorraine?
Yeah, Rosa.
If I may say something, it is very difficult, and it depends on you as the individual farmer to get to know and to get to learn the rhythm of your own farm, because every farm is completely different. I can't farm in Kastilberg the way in Johan farms in Stellenbosch. It's completely two different climates. But there are some things that you can do to make it easier. If you sow a cover crop every winter and you feed it properly and you roll it flat in spring or early summer, you will have a cover on the soil for the rest of the season. So you won't have big, you won't have a problem with weeds. So there are some things that you can do to make organic farming easier for yourself. It is actually, the art lies in the fine tuning, not in the basics, in the fine tuning. But there are some things, some basic elements that you can do to make it simpler for yourself. Like mulching or sowing a cover crop annually and flattening it at a certain time in spring is the poor man's way of making compost, of starting the composting process. If you don't have money for compost, other ways to do it. It might take a bit longer to build your soil health, but there are other ways of doing it and cheaper ways. If we just know.
Johan, we had a question about land caring or land sparing. Like, please explain.
Okay, so I'm trying to think, let's say 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I had a person who regularly visited the vineyards, and they are more like a conventional farming mindset type of person. They work for the university. So well educated, knows a lot more about viticulture and oenology than I do. And this person came to me one day and said to me, you know, I'm really concerned about what you're doing on your farm, because with all your weeds and all your insects and your stuff, you're going to contaminate all your neighbors' lands. You'll have an explosion of weeds, and you'll have an explosion of insects, and they will go and spread havoc in the valley if left unchecked. So that person offered me an alternative. They said, if you really, you know, your motivation is that you love nature, and you do agree that even if you farm organically or biodynamically, you're still interrupting and interfering with nature. Then if your farm is, let's say, 40 hectares in size or whatever X, I suggest that you rather farm 80% of it or 90% of it conventionally to attain the tonnage that you need to survive financially, and then you put the remainder 5 or 10% of your farm back to wilderness, rather than to try and farm your entire farm organically, where you will then get the same amount of tons at the end of the day as a business to keep you going. That way you reduce risk in your farming endeavors, and you actually allow nature to really flourish in certain pockets. I, for a long time, struggled with that concept, because I think what I found appealing was this idea of having a pocket of wilderness that you could really leave and not touch, like that permaculture model that we spoke about earlier. But I struggled with the idea of just going back to conventional agriculture and using herbicides and pesticides and fungicides and everything all over again. And then one of the students, she's now a doctor, Lorraine Geldenhuys, she's an entomologist. And she and some of her students had been documenting insect behavior and populations on our farm for many years now. And I went to chat to her about it. And yeah, one of her colleagues is a professor, Sam Ways, he's also from the University of Stellenbosch. And they made a very interesting observation. They said to me, if you take a step back and if you think about this globally, you can say that pockets of wilderness are important, and that would only be the truth. Of course, they're important. One cannot deny that. But if you really wanted to make a difference in terms of global warming, one of the biggest culprits globally would be modern agriculture. And they've thought that it was absolutely crucial to practice not necessarily organics or biodynamics, but some form of regenerative agriculture where you sequestrate carbon in your soils, you build up your soils and you become regenerative. And that from a global perspective, to farm organically, biodynamically, regeneratively made a bigger contribution than to farm conventionally and just have a small portion of my farm which was put under a pocket of wilderness. They did justify it though, and they said that, where I live, there is not really pristine wilderness. This area has been farmed for 300 years now. But if I had a farm or access to a farm where there was a patch of pristine, say, virgin fynbos, granitic soil or whatever, they would definitely go out and protect those because they are endangered.
Once again, it depends on your environment and what your specific, the design of your specific farm. I'm going to get to that point in a moment because I've got a question for Rosa later on about the design of a farm. Johan, a lot of people are interested in the concept of biodynamics and applying this on their farm. As you know, it wasn't always smooth sailing from the beginning. How long? Give people some encouragement. When do you actually quit? When don't you quit?
I think you never quit. But to make it a bit easier, surround yourself with good people. That is absolutely key. So that's some of the best advice that I got ever, was to surround myself with people who are better than I am in their respective fields. And that really helps a lot because you don't limit, it to your own ability. You transcend your ability that way. The second thing, and I mentioned this during the talk, is I read that book of Viktor Frankl, and he said that if you understand the why, you can sort of figure out the how. And what happened is this guy ended up in 4 different concentration camps in the Second World War, and he lost all his loved ones. And he got to a point where he wanted to do exactly that. He wanted to quit. He just take me to the gas chambers because there's just no meaningful existence in this environment. And then he started thinking about it. And then he thought about if he came out, what he could do and what contribution he could make to the greater good of humanity. And then when he had that was the dream that kept him going. So I think if you're going to go the organic and the biodynamic route, you must really want to do it. You must believe that it's gonna, I can't change the world, but it is a bit of that think global, act local. I want to, in my life, make a difference. If you really believe that and you go for it, you will find a way. People will help you and you go there and get there. What I'm going to do, and I don't have it in front of me now, but John gave me a poem that was written by Goethe on commitment and how when you commit on a path with heart, how things just fall in place going forward to make your dream come true. And that has really been the story of my life. I met people and things happened to me that I never foresaw would happen. And they really made this dream be possible. I'd say have good people around you and believe in your dream, then it becomes a lot easier.
Thank you, Johan. Let's look at climate change and see where organic or biodynamic farming fit into this puzzle of climate change. I do not think we should even debate the fact if climate change is real or not. Climate change is here and it is happening. Allow me to quote some shocking facts. First, and I'll quote 6. There's a rise in global temperature 16 of the 17 years since 2001. have been the warmest years on record ever, according to NASA. This was quoted 2 years ago. Secondly, there's a shrinking of the ice sheets of Greenland and the Antarctic at billions of tons every year since 1993. Thirdly, sea levels are rising. There's acidification of our oceans. There's loss of our most beautiful and life-giving forests. Extreme climatic events like destructive fires, storms, and catastrophic winds, and loss of many rare animal species across the world. Mother Earth is unhappy. Mother Earth is telling us something is wrong, something is out of balance. The first thing the normal consumer looks to in a case like this is the farmer, demanding to use less chemicals and go more organic. Well, many farmers in the Western Cape on the wine farms are, not only on the wine farms, in the Western Cape in general, I can say, are already under huge financial threat. They do not get support from the government like our counterparts do in Europe. To go organic is not easy, like Johan expressed. It is costly and it's filled with landmines on the way. It is easy to lose a crop if you do not know your land and you cannot react to weather patterns within hours. It's expensive to join the certification bodies and it's difficult. Many farmers would love to go organic, but the road to be certified is just so problematic. International pharmaceutical companies have multi-millions of dollars as insurance against crop loss and court cases. They should use this money to develop new green organic products to fight pests and diseases in crops. But we cannot always blame the multinationals for producing chemicals. After the Industrial Revolution, chemical fertilizer, fungicides and pesticides were developed also to keep up with fast-growing populations. About 10 years ago, some top guys from Bayer visited this country. They spoke briefly to me and asked me what I think the way forward should be. My answer was straight: go more green. And they have tried. There are many examples how pharmaceutical companies have supplied greener products. Like, for example, we now release natural insects to control mealybug. There's a new organic product on its way, I believe, and many farmers will be happy to hear this, to treat both the mildews. Thirdly, there are many different products that include microorganisms to increase soil health. We know that the three most crucial and difficult problems to treat on an organic or biodynamic farm are the following: downy mildew, powdery mildew, and of course weed control. Weed control is a big issue on an organic and a biodynamic farm. We should all demand that the cures for these are developed quickly and cheaply. Help the farmer to go organic. Maybe the government can even sponsor the organic farmers. Maybe we should form a center within the wine industry where farmers can ask for guidance and help if they want to go organic. Maybe Vinpro or WineTech can assist here. If we can put half the entire population of Mother Earth under lockdown for 30 days, surely we can pool all resources internationally to support our environment that feeds us in an attempt to avoid another and a new virus that might come. But what else can a farmer do on his own farm to take better care of nature and his environment? I'll quote 9 different things. Firstly, stop erosion by working with cover crops and contours and not overplow. Plant drought-resistant varieties if you're in a dry region. Preserve the soil, build soil health to build strong plants to resist disease better. Use water sparingly. Use mulch under the vines to preserve moisture and fight weeds. Start a more holistic way of farming, like in the old days. Have livestock and grain fields to form a circle of support on the farm, like Johan Reyneke explained. Give your people skills and a love for agriculture. Keep natural felt or indigenous plants on your farm in pockets for indigenous insects and animals. Migratory roads or pathways for smaller animals and insects. Give them a place to help you fight the bad insects. It's all about balance in nature. I think if there's bad insects and there's good insects, and in a way they control each other better if there's space for the good insects. And lastly, but not least, make compost. It's much, much easier than you think. Once you've started, you'll never not make compost. Last but not least, you as a consumer, what can you do? You're not a farmer, you're a normal citizen. You go to work in the mornings at 6:30, 7:30, you come back at 5. What can you do as an ordinary citizen? Well, don't always look elsewhere when we talk about organic farming. Organic farming is a way of life. It's a philosophy, and it should be yours too. What can you do? Let me quote a couple of examples. Use less and throw away less. Consume less. Buy less. Now, I think after the last month, we all realized exactly with how little we can actually get along. Don't do plastic. And I don't have to tell you more about that. We all have seen the shocking pictures of how polluted the sea is with plastic bags. Buy local produce that are in season. Do not, for example, buy fine beans flown in from Kenya, wrapped in plastic or some kind of wrapping 3 times. Plant your own veggies, even small, even just a little, and learn to eat what is in your garden in season. Sometimes if you drive through very low-cost housing environments, you see there's 3 tires stacked on each other, filled with good soil, and there's spinach growing. And another one has 3 chickens, and another guy has a couple of bean plants or peas or whatever, and that's how they eat. Keep chickens. So many of us have huge gardens and live a life of luxury. Keep chickens in your garden and eat your own eggs. It is so easy to keep chickens, actually. Keep 1 or 2 beehives and eat your own honey. Very easy. Phone up your beekeeper. There's always beekeepers around. Ask him to bring 2 beehives. The beekeeper takes half the honey. You keep half the honey. Buy organic veggies and organic wine. A blemish-free, huge, shiny apple have been sprayed about 10 times throughout the season, each time with 2 to 4 different chemicals. And that is what you eat. As long as consumers demand blemish-free fruit and veggies, we should never complain about pesticides. Buy organic, and sorry, Johan, I know he does not agree with me on this one. Buy organic and be prepared to pay more for it. Last but not least, be kind to animals. They're part of the team. They're also a member of our team. We all have contributed. We all have to contribute to try to prevent another international pandemic. We cannot only look at the big boys. Do your bit. Go more green. Thank you.
Thank you for watching that. The 3 of us really enjoyed this recording, and we enjoyed the conversations and the questions that helped us formulate this discussion. If you have any more questions, you're welcome to send me an email on lgwines@gmail.com, and perhaps I can put you in contact with people that can answer your question if I can't. Thank you.